Most folks think their cast iron is ruined the second it looks dark. They scrub it, strip it, re-season it, start all over again. They believe that shiny new look is what they should be chasing. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That dark, ugly-looking cast iron in your grandmother's cabinet, that's not a problem. That's the opposite of a problem. That's decades of cooking history that's actually making your food taste better and cook more evenly than any pan you could buy new today. I'm going to tell you something that contradicts what every YouTube channel and every casting company wants you to hear. Your cast iron isn't getting seasoned worse as it gets darker and thicker. It's getting better. It's developing what we call a polymerized coating, layers and layers of oil that have bonded to the metal at a molecular level through repeated heat. That's not a stain you need to clean off. That's not oxidation you should fear. That's armor. And the darker it gets, the better it works. The average homesteader buys a cast iron pan and treats it like it's going to stay pristine forever. They worry about water spots. They panic about slight discoloration. They think a single drop of moisture means disaster. Then they strip the whole pan back to bare metal and start the seasoning process over, which takes weeks of baking oil and patience. Meanwhile, a pan that's been properly used and maintained for 30 years sits in someone's cabinet doing exactly what it should be doing, getting stronger, more non-stick, and more valuable, with every single meal cooked in it. Here's what I want you to understand about cast iron that changes everything. Cast iron doesn't need to be babied. It needs to be used. A pan sitting in a cabinet, perfectly clean and protected, is a pan that's actually degrading. The seasoning is just sitting there, exposed to air and humidity, waiting to get damaged. But a pan that's cooking food, that's getting heat and fat every single day, that's a pan that's building its seasoning in real time, adding layers, becoming more resistant to rust, becoming smoother and more effective. The secret that costs almost nothing and saves you hundreds of dollars on replacing pans is actually doing the opposite of what you've been told. Stop worrying about keeping your cast iron perfect. Start worrying about using it properly. Use it every day if you can. Cook with fat, butter, lard, bacon grease, olive oil, coconut oil. Every time you cook, you're adding another infinitesimal layer to that seasoning. You're making that pan work better. You're making it more valuable. Now, there's a specific technique that most people don't know about, and this is where the real magic happens. After you cook with your cast iron, you don't need to wash it with soap and water and dry it perfectly and worry about water spots. That's actually damaging your seasoning faster than anything else because you're exposing the metal to moisture and then friction. Instead, here's what works. While the pan is still warm or hot, wipe out the excess food with a cloth or paper towel. Then, and this is the key part, wipe a tiny amount of oil across the entire surface while it's still warm. I'm talking a small amount, just enough to coat it. The heat helps that oil bond to the seasoning you've already built. That's it. That's the entire method. No expensive products, no complicated restoration process, no stripping and re-seasoning. Just continuous, gentle use and a tiny bit of oil added while the pan is warm. Over weeks and months, you'll watch that pan transform. The seasoning builds, the non-stick surface improves, and you're spending pennies instead of dollars because you're using what's already in your kitchen. Here's where most people make their first mistake. They think one little mistake, one washing with soap, one time they let it sit wet, means they have to start over. So they panic, they overcorrect, they strip the whole pan and begin again. This is backwards thinking. Cast iron is forgiving. A pan that's been seasoned for years has so many layers of protection that one small slip doesn't undo decades of cooking. You have to truly abuse a pan over a long period to damage it beyond recovery. The reason cast iron pans from the 1800s and early 1900s are still being used and passed down as heirlooms is because people understood something we've forgotten. They cooked with them constantly. They used good fat. They wiped them clean while warm and added a bit more fat. They didn't overthink it. They didn't treat it like it was fragile. They treated it like a tool, because that's what it is. And after decades of use, those pans became better and better, smoother and smoother, more reliable and more valuable. Now, there's something else that nobody talks about, and this is going to sound backwards, but it's true. You actually don't want a perfectly shiny, brand new looking cast iron pan for everyday cooking. You want the one that's been used. You want the one with the dark, thick seasoning. You want the one that looks slightly worn, because that's the one where the cooking surface has been polished smooth by thousands of meals. The microscopic valleys have been filled in by layers of polymerized oil. That's the pan that's going to give you food with better flavor, better browning, and better results. The reason cast iron became the standard tool in farm kitchens and hunting cabins and trail camps wasn't because it was fancy or pretty. It was because it worked better and lasted forever. A cast iron pan doesn't care about your stress. It doesn't care about perfect technique. It just wants to be used, to be heated, to have fat applied to it regularly. That's it. And in return, it gives you a cooking surface that gets better with every single use instead of worse. Most of the advice you see online is trying to sell you something: a seasoning product, a fancy cleaner, a restoration kit, a new pan because yours is too far gone. But the cast iron itself doesn't care about your money. It just wants to work. It just wants to be used the way it was made to be used. And when you start thinking about it that way, everything changes. You stop being afraid of your pan. You start being grateful for it. And you stop wasting money trying to keep it pristine when what actually makes it better is simple, everyday use. Let me give you the actual formula that costs basically nothing and will transform the cast iron you already own. First, use it. Cook with it. Use good fat: bacon grease, butter, lard. These are real fats that polymerize when heated, building the seasoning. Second, while it's still warm, wipe it out. Use a cloth, a paper towel, even a piece of burlap. Get the excess food out. Third, apply a tiny amount of oil to the warm surface. Use whatever oil you have in your kitchen: olive oil, vegetable oil, even rendered animal fat. Let it cool. That's the entire process. That's all there is to it. The reason this works while all those expensive products don't is because you're working with the metal's natural behavior, not against it. Cast iron wants to have a protective coating. Iron oxide naturally forms on bare iron. Polymerized fat bonds to that coating. This is chemistry that's been happening for hundreds of years, long before anyone was selling seasoning sprays or restoration compounds. The pan knows what it needs to be. You're just giving it what it wants. Here's the counterintuitive part that people resist at first. You should not be afraid of using your cast iron. That's where all the fear comes from. People think, if I use it, I might damage the seasoning, so they use it less. They baby it. They avoid cooking greasy foods because they're worried about buildup. But the buildup is the whole point. The seasoning is built from use, from heat, from fat. The more you use the pan, the more fat you cook with, the faster the seasoning develops. I've seen cast iron pans that were neglected for years, stored in garages or sheds, that people thought were beyond saving. They looked rough. They had surface rust in places. But you know what happened when someone started using them again? The rust came off. The seasoning came back. The pan worked better after a few weeks of regular use than it did when it was brand new, because that's what cast iron does. It heals through use. The biggest waste of money I see in homesteading is people throwing away perfectly good cast iron because they think it's gone bad. They strip it, they sand it, they use harsh chemicals trying to get it back to bare metal, spending hours of work and money on products. Then they have to reseason from scratch, which takes weeks, when all that pan needed was to be used daily with good fat and a simple wipe down while warm. In 6 weeks, that ruined pan would have been better than new. The oil that works best isn't expensive. It's not some specialty product. It's whatever has a high smoke point and is available in your kitchen. Bacon grease is actually ideal because it's mostly rendered fat with a high smoke point. Lard is perfect. Butter works. Olive oil works. Vegetable oil works. Coconut oil works. The point isn't to find the perfect oil. The point is to use something consistently, multiple times a day if you're cooking regularly, so that you're constantly adding thin layers to the seasoning. That's the real secret. Consistency beats perfection every single time. Most people are making this way more complicated than it needs to be. They're watching videos about the right technique for seasoning. They're reading articles about polymerization temperatures. They're worrying about whether they're doing it correctly. But the cast iron doesn't care about your complexity. It cares about heat, fat, and use. That's the entire formula. Heat it up while you cook. Add fat to that heat. Use it over and over again. The rest is just noise. I want to be direct about something. You don't need to buy a new cast iron pan. You don't need to spend money on restoration products. You don't need to learn some complicated technique. If you have cast iron already, even old cast iron, even ruined cast iron, that pan is salvageable through use alone. And if you don't have cast iron, The best time to start is today, and the best way to start is with whatever cast iron you can find, at a thrift store, at an estate sale, passed down from family. Use it. Use good fat. Wipe it warm. Apply a tiny bit of oil. Do that every time you cook. Within weeks, you'll have a pan that works better than any new one you could buy. The mathematics of this are simple. A bottle of oil costs $2 or $3 and lasts months of daily cooking. You're adding an imperceptible amount each time. Compare that to buying a new $40 or $50 cast iron pan every few years because you thought the old one was damaged. Compare that to paying for seasoning products, restoration kits, wire brushes, sandpaper, and hours of your own labor. The cheapest cast iron pan you'll ever own is the one you already have, maintained through daily use and a few pennies worth of fat. That's not just practical. That's how humans have cooked for centuries. Now here's something that's going to help you understand why this method works so well while all the fancy techniques don't. Every single time you apply heat to fat in cast iron, you're triggering a chemical reaction called polymerization. That means the fat isn't just sitting on top of the metal, it's bonding to it. It's literally becoming part of the cooking surface. This happens at a molecular level during cooking. It's not something you have to activate with special techniques or perfect timing. It's automatic. Physics and chemistry doing their work while you're just cooking your dinner. The old-timers who built the cast iron culture that we're talking about here didn't have YouTube videos. They didn't have science explanations. They just knew that using the pan regularly with good fat made it better. And they were right. Because the chemistry backs it up. Because that's how the metal works. The dark seasoning on an old pan isn't some magical coating. It's thousands of days of cooking, creating thousands of microscopic layers of bonded fat and iron oxide, built up into something that outperforms anything you could apply in an afternoon. This is where most DIY homestead advice fails you. It complicates things to justify selling you something. But cast iron is actually the opposite. Cast iron is the simplest kitchen tool you can own. It doesn't need electricity, it doesn't need batteries, it doesn't need an instruction manual, it doesn't need you to buy special products. It just needs to be used with the same method that's worked for 200 years. Heat, fat, regular use, and a warm wipe down with a tiny bit of oil. That's the whole recipe. End of part 1. Now, here's what separates the people who keep cast iron for life and the people who give up on it after a year. Most folks think seasoning is something you do once and you're done. They'll read some article about the perfect oven temperature, spend an afternoon baking their pan at 500 degrees, and then they'll treat it like a museum piece. Don't touch it. Don't cook on it too much. Don't wash it. They're terrified they'll ruin it. And that fear? That's exactly what ruins it. The reality is the opposite. Cast iron gets better the more you use it. Every single time you cook something fatty in that pan, you're adding another layer. Every time you fry an egg, you're building the seasoning. Every time you sear meat, you're reinforcing the protection. This is not delicate. This is not fragile. You're not going to ruin it by actually cooking in it. In fact, you're ruining it by not cooking in it. I've seen families inherit cast iron from their grandmothers that's been sitting in a cabinet for 30 years, and when they finally pull it out, they find rust starting to creep in at the edges. Meanwhile, I've seen cast iron pans that are used 3 times a week, year after year, that look like polished obsidian. The difference isn't luck. It's not magic. It's work. Regular, ordinary work. Here's the maintenance habit that costs almost nothing and takes 30 seconds. After you cook, while the pan is still warm but cool enough to touch safely, you wipe it out with a paper towel or cloth to remove any stuck food. Then, and this is the crucial part, you take a tiny amount of oil. I mean truly tiny. Just a dot. And you rub it across the entire surface with a clean cloth. Not a thick coating, not a slick layer, just enough that it looks slightly glossy, like the pan has a light sheen to it. That's it. That's the whole maintenance. Now, a lot of people ask which oil is best: vegetable oil, coconut oil, lard, butter, avocado oil. They all work. What matters is consistency, not perfection. Pick one. Use it every time. If you're cooking at high heat, choose an oil with a higher smoke point. If you're just doing daily seasoning, any household oil works fine. I've been using the same bottle of vegetable oil for 3 years because I use so little of it. That bottle cost about $2 when I bought it, and I've probably used less than a quarter of it. The cost per maintenance is measured in pennies. Cast iron works everywhere. On your modern electric stove, on a gas range, on a wood-burning cook stove if you're off-grid. over a campfire, on a rocket stove you built yourself. This is why homesteaders have loved cast iron for so long. It doesn't depend on one type of kitchen. It adapts to wherever you're cooking, whatever setup you have. A cast iron pan is not married to your house. It can move with you. I want to tell you something about the seasoning layers themselves, because this is where the science becomes really interesting, and why cast iron actually improves over time instead of wearing out. When you cook fatty food in cast iron, the fat doesn't just sit on top like it does on a non-stick pan. The heat causes the oil to break down into a polymer. That's a long chain of molecules bonding together, and those polymers fuse directly to the iron. It's not a coating that can flake off. It's not a layer that wears away. It's a chemical transformation. The metal is being altered at the molecular level to become smoother and less reactive. This is why a 90-year-old cast iron pan cooks better than a brand new one, even if the new one looks shinier. The old pan has had 90 years of molecular bonding, 90 years of polymer layers, 90 years of work and use building that seasoning. And here's the beautiful part. You can inherit that quality. When someone hands you their grandmother's cast iron, you're not just getting a pan. You're getting those 90 years of seasoning already built in. You're starting ahead. All you have to do is continue the work. Now, I want to address the most common mistake I see people make with cast iron, and it costs them hundreds of dollars over a lifetime because they think they need to replace their pans. They've been told that cast iron requires special care, special products, special soap. So they buy the branded cast iron soap for $8 a bottle. They buy the cast iron conditioner for $12. They buy the special cleaning brush. They buy the seasoning spray. And all of that is completely unnecessary. It's marketing pretending to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Cast iron was kept perfectly fine for centuries without any of that. Your great-grandmother didn't have a special soap. She had water and maybe a small amount of regular dish soap, the kind she made herself or bought for pennies. She dried the pan by hand and wiped it with fat. That's genuinely all it ever needed. The only situation where you might need to do more is if your cast iron gets truly neglected. If rust starts forming or the seasoning gets stripped somehow. If that happens, you have options that still cost almost nothing. The first option is the method we talked about at the beginning, a powder mixed with water that converts the rust into a protective coating. For $3, you can restore a pan that someone would normally throw away. You can bring dead iron back to life. The second option, if you want to go deeper and strip a pan completely back to bare metal, is to use fire. Literally. If you have access to a fire, a campfire, a fireplace, a wood stove, you can hold the pan in the flame for a few minutes. The heat will burn off the old seasoning and any rust, and you'll be left with bare, clean iron. Then you season it fresh. This costs nothing. It takes 5 minutes, and you end up with a pan that's ready for another lifetime of use. The third option, which takes more time but works if you don't have fire, is to use salt and fat. You put coarse salt and a little bit of oil in the pan, heat it up, and then use a paper towel to scrub the salt around the interior. The salt acts like sandpaper and scrubs away whatever seasoning or rust is there, and the oil helps carry it away. A box of salt costs $1. A bottle of oil costs $2. You're paying $3 to completely restore a pan. What I'm telling you is this: there is no situation where you need to throw away cast iron. There is no broken cast iron that can't be fixed for less than $10 and less than an hour of work. And once you understand that, once you've fixed one pan, you'll never look at cast iron the same way again. You'll stop thinking of it as fragile and start thinking of it as indestructible. This is why cast iron is the tool that separates the homesteader who understands real self-sufficiency from the person who thinks self-sufficiency means buying better products. Cast iron is the opposite. It means understanding that the tools your ancestors used are still the best tools, and they last longer, work better, and cost less than anything you'll find in a modern store. It means knowing that when something breaks or wears out, you can fix it with what's already around you. Oil, salt, water, fire. These are the elements of maintenance, and they're the same elements that have maintained cast iron for 200 years. End of part 2. And here's the thing that most people don't realize when they're standing in a kitchen store, looking at a brand new piece of cookware that costs more than a week's groceries. That skillet in your hand, it will outlive you. Not maybe, not if you're careful. It will outlive you. Your grandchildren will cook in it. Their children will cook in it. And every single one of them will understand. The moment they feel the weight of it, the balance, the way heat spreads across the bottom, that they're holding something real. Something that works because it was designed to work, not because a company spent millions convincing you that you need it. The $5 trick I showed you today, that combination of oil, salt, and heat, it's not a secret. It's not something the old Amish communities invented and kept quiet. It's just common sense. It's what people have always done when they didn't have money to replace things. When you couldn't afford to throw something away, you learned how to keep it. You learned how to listen to what the tool needed. And cast iron, once you understand it, starts talking to you. It tells you when it's hungry for oil. It tells you when it's been used right. It tells you when you've taken care of it properly. That's the difference between owning a tool and being a steward of a tool. And on a homestead, that difference matters more than anything else you'll ever learn. Because a homestead isn't built on buying new things. It's built on understanding old things, on maintaining them, on making them last generation after generation. So the next time you're tempted to buy a new non-stick pan because you think your cast iron is too much work, remember this. You're not choosing between convenience and tradition. You're choosing between the illusion of convenience and something that actually works, every single time, for the rest of your life. And that's not just about cooking. That's about understanding what real value looks like on a homestead. Now, I know some of you watching are sitting there thinking, this is great, but I've got 10 other things on my homestead that need fixing or improving. And you're right. There are always a dozen projects waiting. That's why I created a complete guide to everything I've shared on this channel. Every repair, every hack, every trick to save money while you're building something real. It covers cast iron care, tool maintenance, weatherproofing, garden improvements, storage solutions, fence repairs, and dozens of other homestead challenges that usually cost you a fortune if you call someone to do the work. But they don't have to. Not when you know what to do. That guide is free to download at the link in the description. No email required. No strings. Just straightforward, practical solutions for the kinds of problems every homesteader faces. Because I believe that knowledge shouldn't be locked behind paywalls or fancy marketing. It should be available to anyone who's willing to put in the work. And if you're watching this video, you're already the kind of person who does the work. Before you go, I want to leave you with one more thought. The homesteading life, whether you're Amish like me or you're someone in town who's decided to grow your own food and fix your own things, it's not about suffering through inconvenience. It's the opposite. It's about discovering that the simple way often works better than the complicated way. That understanding how things work gives you more freedom, not less. And that the best tools you'll ever own are the ones that last long enough to teach you something about patience and care. So take that cast iron off the shelf. Use it tonight. Feel the weight of it. Let it teach you. And when you're done cooking, spend 2 minutes with salt and oil and a cloth. That's it. That's the entire system. 2 minutes of care that will keep that pan working for a lifetime. Thanks for watching. If this video helped you understand your cast iron a little better, or if it convinced you to pull an old pan out of storage and give it another shot, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next homestead hack or repair trick coming your way. And most importantly, click that notification bell. That way, whenever I upload something new, you'll be the first to know. Because on a homestead, the knowledge that saves you time and money is the kind of knowledge worth staying close to. I'll see you in the next one.